Hello, it's been a while, like over a year. I completely forgot that I'd started doing this, and my life also became really busy because I was doing my A levels. So I'm not gonna lie, this was not on my mind at all. And then I randomly was like I was on my YouTube and I saw that because I have like a few accounts. Oh my god, I'm losing my voice. This is not good for us. But anyway, I have a few accounts, and I was on this YouTube channel specifically, and I like looked at it and I was like, oh my god, I forgot about that. But anyway, it's great to see you again. The views on the other ones, especially the first one, didn't realise there were that many. Now I feel like extra bad for not reading for a while. Also, I used to read on my TV because, where there's a screen, AO3 will be seen and all that. But I'm downstairs, so I have to do it on my laptop, which means you might hear me clicking in the background when I have to like swipe down to the next bit of the chapter. I'll try and cut it out, but I'm not gonna lie, it might just keep happening. We'll ignore it, okay? Also, this fic is really, 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 really long. We all know that. And it's actually finished now. So this might take a hot minute for me to actually record all of it, and I'm actually hoping that I will remain, what's the word? Consistent. But we'll see, because I also have a job now, so I'm really busy. But I'm not in school anymore, which means that my schedule will be a little bit more free, I hope. Also, I've never recorded myself before the video like before the actual fic starts or whatever, the chapter. So yeah, this is a bit weird because I'm talking to you directly. Let me know if you like want that. I don't know, because I feel like sometimes I just dive right into the chapter and I'm like, there are a couple things I want to say, or I want to say things after. Just let me know if that's like annoying or not. Also, I feel like I say like a lot. We'll just pretend that's not true. Oh, also, I'm using like a little microphone, so if the sound is a bit better, then that's why. But yeah, okay, let's go. The Golden King by Maladaptivewriting. Chapter 4, The Forbidden Forest. Regulus thought about going home for Christmas. He felt slightly bad for Creature, stuck in Grimmauld all alone with only Regulus's mother's painting for comfort. Regulus felt like she had gone insane in her portrait. He wondered if she was even capable of leaving the frame to talk to any of the other portraits in the house. He'd never seen her do so and hadn't asked Creature. If he was honest with himself, he didn't really want to ask Creature anything about his mother at all. Regulus and his mother had a very distant relationship in his childhood. Sirius was her son, Regulus was his father's. Of course, she became far more overbearing in the later years of his life once Sirius began to act out, especially when Sirius was eventually disowned. He didn't have many fond memories of the woman, and he had no desire to spend any time with her now. He could only imagine what she'd been saying to Creature all those years. So, Regulus did think about going home, but only briefly, and ultimately decided it would be best to stay at Hogwarts. Besides, who knew what trouble Harry could get into alone in the giant castle? He wondered why Harry wasn't willing or didn't want to go home for the holiday, but he kept himself from prying too much. He asked once or twice, but Harry was always quick to change the subject. Draco tried taunting Harry for the fact that he was staying. He seemed to find it wildly entertaining, though clearly no one else did. Harry actually seemed unbothered by the taunts, which was highly unusual. It stood out enough that Regulus was sure Harry was purposely hiding his feelings about the topic, burying all of them, including his reaction to Draco's taunts. Regulus woke up Christmas morning warm in his dorm bed, and for a moment he forgot where he was. The feeling of Christmas was in the air, and Regulus let himself fantasize about his last happy holiday, the Christmas of his 5th year, when James wrote him letters every other day. James had wanted to stay in the castle to spend time with him, but they both knew it would be too suspicious for Sirius. They spent the week before break sneaking around the castle, avoiding James's friends and stealing food from the kitchens. Regulus purposefully let go of the memory. It wouldn't help him to dwell on James today. He finally got out of bed when he heard Ron and Harry moving around, both of them waking slowly before remembering what day it was. Ron jumped up excitedly, but Harry moved much slower. He wondered about the difference in their behaviour, but he didn't understand Christmas excitement well enough to make sense of it. Harry's reaction made slightly more sense to him, as Regulus had not expected to get presents for Christmas. They never exchanged gifts in his home growing up, so it hadn't occurred to him that he might receive something. He certainly hadn't purchased anything for anyone else, so he was surprised when he discovered a small package at the foot of his bed. He unwrapped it slowly and discovered a hand-knitted blue sweater with a gold R stitched onto the front of it. "Oh no," Ron groaned. "She made you a Weasley sweater. Every year she makes us a sweater and mine's always maroon." Ron said to Regulus as he unwrapped his own sweater. Regulus understood his complaint when he saw it. The maroon colour clashed painfully with Ron's complexion, making him look like he'd recently contracted a deadly illness. "Oh," Regulus said uncomfortably. "Well, tell her I said thank you." The sweater was extremely soft and comfortable, and Regulus surprised himself by putting it on immediately. His own mother had never given him a Christmas gift. It wasn't something they did in their family. His mother didn't consider it proper, and his father was never home for Christmas, so his opinion hardly mattered. His brother usually snuck a few sweets for them both when they were children, but after Sirius went to Hogwarts, Regulus spent almost every Christmas alone. He thought briefly about the one Christmas he spent imagining himself at James's house again, but wrenched his thoughts away quickly. It was too dangerous to think about such things in the light of day. Regulus was extremely interested in Harry's gifts. The flute from Hagrid and a sweater from Mrs. Weasley weren't a surprise, but his father's invisibility cloak was. Regulus had watched James take off the cloak enough times to recognise it on sight, and seeing it in Harry's small hands made Regulus's heart clench painfully. Why didn't Harry have the cloak? He'd forgotten about it until that moment, but it seemed odd that he wouldn't be given it until he was 11. Regulus looked at the note attached to the package, but it gave no further indication of who it could be from. Why didn't James have his invisibility cloak when he died? He wondered if it would have helped him on the night the Dark Lord came to kill them. Could James have escaped with it had he had it? Could Lily? The thoughts caused nausea to sweep through him, and he worked to push them away. It was too painful to think of the what-ifs from that night. Worst of all was the gift from Harry's aunt and uncle. It was a small parcel with a note attached that said, "We received your message and enclosed your Christmas present. From Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia." All that was in the parcel was a piece of Muggle money. Regulus didn't know much about Muggle money, but he could tell that Harry was annoyed. "That's friendly," Harry grumbled. Ron was fascinated by the money, but Regulus knew immediately that something was very wrong with Harry's home life. He'd noticed before that Harry was skinnier than he should be at his age, the smallest of the 6 Gryffindor boys, but Regulus thought perhaps he just wasn't a big eater. However, he also noticed that Harry tended to eat like someone was about to steal the food right off of his plate. These two things combined painted an unfortunate image, plus the small non-gift from his family made Regulus very worried, though he wasn't sure what to do about it. Briefly, and with great pain, he wondered what James would want him to do. The first night that Harry had the invisibility cloak, Regulus noticed him sneaking out of their dorm late at night, not exactly a surprise given who his father was. He told them he was searching the library's restricted section for information on Nicholas Flamel, but Regulus guessed that he was mostly out wandering the castle. It seemed harmless to Regulus, so he made no effort to stop him. However, one morning he told them about a strange mirror he discovered while trying to run from Filch and Snape. He told them that he had seen his parents, and while Ron was immediately fascinated with what Harry was saying, Regulus was watching closely as Harry picked around his food, a vacant look in his eyes. Harry woke Regulus and Ron later that night and dragged them both around the castle until he found the room with the mirror in it. "See?" Harry whispered. He threw his cloak on the ground as they entered the room and approached the mirror as quickly as his tiny legs would let him. "I can't see anything," Ron replied. He sounded irritable. It had taken far longer than expected for Harry to find the room again, and it was clear that Ron was tired and grumpy. "Look! Look at them all!" Harry's voice was laced with reverence. The vacant look in his eyes from earlier was gone, but it was replaced with a glazed look like he was sleepwalking. "I can only see you," Ron said, shaking his head slightly. "Look at it properly. Go on. Stand where I am." Regulus looked at the mirror curiously, while Ron and Harry talked. It had some sort of writing on the top, but Regulus wasn't sure what it said. It wasn't in any language that he could recognise. Ron exclaimed when he finally stood where Harry had been standing, telling them he saw himself holding the house cup and the Quidditch cup while wearing a head boy badge. "Do you think this mirror shows the future?" Ron asked. "How can it? All my family is dead." "Regulus, you take a look," Harry said, shoving Ron out of the way. "Hey!" Ron protested as Regulus walked up to look in the mirror, ignoring Ron's outburst. Regulus watched as his 11-year-old self vanished from the mirror and was replaced with an older version, his 18-year-old self. Except this wasn't him exactly. He was wearing a short-sleeved Muggle t-shirt like the ones he saw Sirius in, and his forearms were blank and unmarked. Standing beside him was James. smiling and wrapping his arms around Regulus's waist. The two of them grinned widely at each other and kissed softly, lovingly. "Regulus, are you okay?" he heard Harry say. "Yes," he said. His voice sounded rough, and only then did he realise he was crying. He wiped at his eyes furiously, embarrassed that he had broken down so easily. "What do you see?" Ron asked tentatively. "It doesn't matter," Regulus said. "I don't think we should be messing with this mirror." Both of the boys looked unwilling to argue with him. It was clear that Harry was still anxious to look into it again and see his family, but Regulus's tears seemed to have unsettled him. A sudden noise outside the room interrupted them, and they quickly ran back to their dorm to avoid being caught out of bed. They were lucky that no one caught them, even with the invisibility cloak. Their footsteps were loud and echoey in the castle corridors. Regulus noticed Harry sneaking off the next night, but he didn't follow him, no matter how much he worried about the mirror's effect on the boy. He didn't know what that mirror was, but he wasn't interested in being taunted with what he could and never have. He'd made his choice. Despite his insistence that he wouldn't waste his dwelling on the past, he still found himself ruminating on the if-onlys. If only he hadn't taken the mark. If only he had run when Sirius did. If only he hadn't been sorted into Slytherin. If only he hadn't been a Black. The if-onlys seemed to run through his head on repeat, and he had more trouble than usual blocking them out after seeing what future he could have had. Regulus barely ate in the days after seeing the mirror, and by the time school started back up, Regulus was shaking and disoriented from lack of food and sleep. He heard Hermione chiding Harry for being out after hours and not using the cloak to research Flamel, but he was too disconnected to chime in. It didn't matter either way. He didn't want them looking for Flamel, and he didn't want Harry going into the mirror. But what could he do? Steal the invisibility cloak from a child? No, he'd never do that, no matter how much danger Harry could be in. That cloak belonged to Harry. It was likely one of the only pieces Harry had left of his father. It would feel like a betrayal to James to take it, and Regulus had betrayed James more than enough for one lifetime. The beginning of term wasn't enough to bring him back. He was only shaking out of his funk when he found out that Snape would be refereeing the next Gryffindor Quidditch game. Regulus knew that Snape hated Harry, but this seemed like an odd way to play out his vendetta. He wondered if Snape would do something to hurt Harry during the game, but it felt like it was far too public of a venue. Then again, if he was the one to jinx the broom the first time round, that was also far too public. He wondered why Snape wouldn't just go after Harry in private if that was his goal. The other children were positive that Snape would use the opportunity to hurt Harry, or worse, cause them to lose the game. Their words, not his. The issue was moot, though, when Harry caught the snitch only a few minutes after the game began. His flying was impeccable, as if he came out of the womb on a broom. Even James, as good of a Quidditch player as he was, couldn't fly like that without years of practice. Disturbingly, Harry, Ron and Hermione also discovered who Nicholas Flamel was shortly after the new year started. Regulus had underestimated them. He thought he at least had a few more months before they figured it out. Though they figured out what was probably hidden at Hogwarts, Regulus didn't think it would necessarily put them in any more danger. He listened to them theorise about why Snape was trying to steal it, though the prospects of infinite wealth and immortality seemed like enough for them. All this meant to Regulus was that none of them knew that Snape had once served the Dark Lord. It was probably for the best, though Regulus himself didn't trust Snape. He didn't need a group of children planning to accuse a dangerous Death Eater of something at the wrong time. The afternoon after the Quidditch game, Harry shared the details of a conversation he overheard between Snape and Quirrell, where Snape threatened Quirrell before questioning him about how to get past Fluffy. "So, you mean the stone's only safe as long as Quirrell stands up to Snape?" Hermione said. "It will be gone by next Tuesday," Ron added. Regulus agreed, though it was clear that Quirrell had no idea how to get past Fluffy. Quirrell was a horrendous defence teacher, so this didn't surprise him. He spent many hours mulling over how he himself might get past a three-headed dog, but short of an extremely powerful sleeping draught, he wasn't totally sure. A creature that size would require a high-powered spell to kill it or even knock it out, and it would most likely take more than one person to deal with it, not to mention that Dumbledore would know immediately that someone had broken in and stolen the stone the moment he saw the dead animal. If someone were trying to be sneaky about it, they would have to knock Fluffy out for only a short enough time to get in and grab the stone. Time picked up once the spring term began. Hermione started studying for finals 10 weeks early, and though Regulus didn't need to study, he ended up joining her in the library most of the time, using the time to secretly research soul magic and dangerous animals. One afternoon, when Harry and Ron deigned to join them, they saw Hagrid in the library, an odd sight to be sure. "You're not still looking for Nicholas Flamel, are you?" Hagrid asked. Way to bury the plot, Regulus thought. Hagrid was the absolute worst choice for hiding secrets, Regulus decided. Though he was a kind man, and Regulus was surprised by how much he liked him, he was very unimpressed with his ability to keep information to himself. Regulus would be annoyed if it wasn't for how caring the half-giant was towards Harry, offering support and friendship that no other adult seemed to. "Oh, we found out who he is ages ago," Ron said smugly. "Hush!" Regulus hissed at him. Ron looked vaguely offended for a moment, before it was replaced with the serious look that always crossed his face when Regulus told him to do something like he was a secret spy given an important mission. Regulus privately found the expression endearing. Something about a small child looking so responsible, like he was mimicking an adult, really tugged at his heartstrings. "You have no business looking into that," Hagrid scolded. "We're not," Regulus promised with an innocent smile. "Don't worry." Hagrid gave him a side-eyed look, clearly not believing him. Hagrid left a few moments later after asking them to come and see him. "What was he hiding behind his back?" Hermione asked. Regulus was curious as well, but he didn't feel like this boded well. Ron went to check the section Hagrid had been in, and came back with a dismayed look on his face. "Dragons," he whispered importantly. "He was looking up stuff about dragons." "Oh no," Regulus groaned. Harry chuckled, and even Hermione looked mildly amused, though it was quickly replaced with her signature pinched, concerned look. "Hagrid's always wanted a dragon. He told me so the first time I ever met him," Harry said. "Well, let's stay out of it," Regulus said before Ron could respond. "If Hagrid is trying to illegally obtain and raise a dragon in his wooden hut, then we should be as far away as possible." Hermione nodded, but Ron and Harry looked unconvinced. Later that night, Hermione, Ron and Harry left to visit Hagrid, planning to talk to him about the Philosopher's Stone. "Be subtle about it," Regulus instructed. "You're not coming with us?" Harry asked, while he threw on his heavy school cloak. Regulus had noticed that he almost always wore his school uniform, even on weekends and evenings. "No, thank you," Regulus said primly. "I am more than happy to remain here." "Whatever," Ron said amicably. "Let's go before it gets too late." "And if he has a dragon," Regulus yelled after them. "We know," Harry interrupted. "Stay out of it." Regulus laughed at his exasperated tone. Once they were gone, Regulus took a quick look through Harry's trunk. He knew it was an invasion of privacy, but he was so curious about why Harry chose not to wear his own clothing. What he found was odd and disturbing. He owned only a few items of clothing, a few loose shirts that Regulus had seen Harry wear to bed in the warmer months, and 2 pairs of pants, both way too large for his small frame. He wondered if he was given anything besides underwear to wear to sleep in. The clothes were worn and old, plus they had a slight smell to them like old sweat that must have been permanently staining the fabric if even the house elves couldn't get them out. Regulus had spent the year accumulating more and more unpleasant facts about Harry's home life, and this just compounded on the disturbing details. He felt rage sear through him, hot and painful, but when it faded, all he felt was guilt. Yes, Regulus hadn't been around when Harry was growing up, still drowned in the cave, but he felt a semblance of responsibility for the boy. He cared about him, and it was becoming clearer every day that he was one of the few adults who did. He wasn't sure what to do about that for the time being, though he knew he would have to tell someone else, and hopefully encourage someone who had the power to help to do so, but for now he decided to fix the problem in front of him. He worried that Harry would be embarrassed if Regulus bought all of his clothes for him, and since Christmas had already passed, he decided to collect a fuller wardrobe, fit for a well-taken care of wizard child, and give it to him for his birthday. He lounged on the bed after deciding this, making a list of everything he would need to purchase, and waited for the others to return. Of course, it turned out that Hagrid had somehow obtained a dragon egg, supposedly winning it in a game of cards with a stranger, and one morning at breakfast, Harry received a note telling him the egg was hatching. Regulus trailed after them as they went down to Hagrid's hut to check it out after their lessons. He should have known that it would be a terrible idea. "Hagrid," Hermione said uncertainly, as the dragon burst out of its egg, "how fast do Norwegian ridgebacks grow exactly?" Regulus watched on nervously. He'd never encountered a dragon in person, and it wasn't something he'd ever planned to do. When he was a child, Sirius used to tell him stories about dragon tamers and the exciting adventurous lives they lived, always talking with clear hero worship, but all the stories did was make Regulus nervous. He remembered having nightmares for weeks about Sirius being attacked and eaten by a dragon. Though the dragon in front of him was as small as a puppy, he still felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. Someone was looking through the gap in the curtains, Regulus heard Hagrid say when he finally started listening to the conversation again. Harry ran to the door and looked out. It was Malfoy, Harry yelled. Great! Malfoy saw the dragon. Of course he did. Harry looked so forlorn that Regulus almost laughed out loud. He managed to keep it in though, holding back the laughter when he realised how bad it could be for them, Hagrid especially, if Draco told anyone. Regulus could understand Harry's worry over the situation, but all Draco seemed to do was smirk at Harry about it. Not much of a plan if you asked Regulus. Regardless, it presented the opportunity for them to convince Hagrid to get rid of the thing. Dragon breeding was highly illegal, and Hagrid lived on the grounds of a school with children living in it. Needless to say, Regulus was more than happy to hear that Hagrid agreed to let Charlie, Ron's older brother, handle the dragon. Charlie agreed to take the dragon, but asked they get it to the astronomy tower at midnight in order for him and his friends to pick it up, which seemed ridiculous to Regulus. Why couldn't they just travel straight to Hagrid's hut instead of asking Hagrid to carry a rapidly growing dragon up to the top of a tower? Of course, it wasn't Hagrid who was going to do it, but Harry and Ron. This was about the time that Regulus put his foot down. Tell Charlie no, Regulus said. There is barely any difference between flying from the astronomy tower to flying to Hagrid's hut, especially if it's at midnight or on a Saturday. We can't tell him no, Ron said bewilderedly, like Regulus had just suggested spitting in the Minister of Magic's face. I'm sure he has a good reason for asking, Harry added pragmatically. Besides, I don't mind. Anything to get rid of Norbert and Malfoy. Regulus rolled his eyes. If Regulus had a galleon for every time Harry brought up Draco in conversation, he would be a very rich man. Not that he wasn't already absurdly rich, but still. Okay, then make Hagrid carry him up there, Regulus argued. Hagrid was the adult for Merlin's sake. There was no reason a group of children should be handling this problem. He probably can't go up there that easily, given how big he is, Ron said. This is ridiculous. You two should not be in charge of this. You're going to get caught, Regulus argued. You're going to get expelled if they find you out of bed moving an illegal dragon through the castle. I have a cloak. It shouldn't be that difficult, Harry said. Shouldn't be that difficult? Are you crazy? Regulus all but yelled. Relax, Reg. It's not a big deal. You don't have to help, Harry said. Regulus paused for a second at the nickname, but decided to let it slide for the time being. Of course I'm going to help. I'm not just going to leave you two on your own, Regulus said. Harry and Ron shared a look of exasperation. The night they moved Norbert ended up only being Harry and Regulus after Ron was bitten by the dragon and had to spend the night in the hospital wing. The cloak wasn't quite big enough to fit 3 children and the dragon's cage, so Hermione stayed behind. The plan was fraught from the beginning when Draco took the book that Ron had stored in Charlie's letter in, meaning Draco knew their exact plan for the night. They stayed hidden throughout the castle easily with the help of the cloak and were treated to the sight of Draco getting detention when McGonagall found him roaming the halls looking for Harry. Why he didn't just give the note to a teacher beforehand seemed ridiculous, but, of course, Draco would want to personally witness Harry getting into trouble. Regulus noticed Harry smirking when they got to the top of the staircase, but decided not to mention it. He didn't think they had time for a full Draco rant in the middle of their task. They almost got away with it all, watching Charlie's friends swoop down on broomsticks and fly away with the dragon, which Regulus found insulting. He couldn't even come himself. But they made the dumb mistake of forgetting the cloak at the top of the tower and were caught on their way down by Filch. Regulus could have hit himself in the head. It was such a rookie mistake, but what was done was done. Both them, plus Draco and Neville, who was out of bed for the express purpose of warning Harry, were given detention, and they lost a total of 150 points for Gryffindor. Harry and Neville were both extremely sulky about this, but Regulus wasn't exactly bothered. The thought of house points barely crossed his mind during his first go around Hogwarts, and he cared even less now. The detention they were given was to be served with Hagrid, which Regulus found ironic given he was the reason they got detention in the first place. When he found out they were going into the Forbidden Forest at night, he just about started screaming at Hagrid. He only barely managed to hold his tongue. As he watched Neville and Draco head off with Fang, alone in the forest, Regulus wondered if perhaps Hagrid was trying to get them all killed. The run-in with the centaur named Ronan put Regulus even more on edge. "Always the innocent are the first victims," Ronan said when Hagrid mentioned something killing unicorns. "So it has been for ages past, so it is now." Regulus shuddered when he heard the words. It felt like Ronan knew more than he was letting on, but then again, it wasn't uncommon for centaurs to keep information to themselves. "Hagrid, look! Red sparks! The others are in trouble!" Regulus heard Harry yell shortly after Ronan left them, trotting deeper into the forest. Hagrid took off towards the sparks, leaving Harry and Regulus alone in the forest. Regulus pulled his wand and looked around warily. The minutes seemed to drag by, but eventually Hagrid found them again, Draco and Neville in tow. "Right, we're changing groups. Neville, you stay with me and Regulus. Harry, you go with Fang and this idiot," Hagrid said, then leaned down to whisper something to Harry. "Wait," Regulus interrupted. "It's fine. I'll go with Draco. Harry, you stay with Neville and Hagrid." Regulus did not feel comfortable being separated from Harry, but he felt like Harry would be safer with Hagrid by his side, even if Hagrid was the one to drag them out of there. Regulus did not like the odds of both Draco and Harry coming back intact if they set off together in the forest. "Fine," Hagrid said. Harry smiled apologetically, while Draco sent a furious glare at both of them. Regulus and Draco set off into the forest with Fang and walked in complete silence for a solid few minutes before Draco started speaking. "Are you actually a black?" Draco asked, his tiny high-pitched voice filled with disdain. "Yes, of course," Regulus said, giving Draco a sidelong look. Draco was watching him through narrowed eyes. "Who are you even related to?" Draco asked, though Regulus felt like that was a very dumb way to phrase the question, given he and Draco were also related. Still, he understood the point of what Draco was asking. "Sirius Black," Regulus answered. "He's my father." He still felt uncomfortable telling this lie. Every time he said his brother's name, he had to swallow down the anger that threatened to overwhelm him. Pretending to be the son of that traitor was difficult, to say the least. "Who's your mum?" Draco said after a second. Regulus wondered how much he knew about Sirius, if Narcissa ever mentioned him. "She's from France. You wouldn't know her." Regulus was used to this excuse. He wondered if anyone would ever grow suspicious of why they would never meet the imaginary woman. "Is she a pureblood?" Draco asked with grave importance. Regulus wasn't exactly surprised by the questions, Lucius and Narcissa no doubt instilling the importance of blood purity into Draco at a very young age. But he was surprised by how frank the question was. Clearly, Draco lacked the delicacy of conversation that Narcissa had perfected by his age. "Yes," Regulus answered confidently, like he wasn't making the entire thing up. He figured it was easier to go with the lie that she was a pureblood. Plus, he still couldn't shake the feeling of shame that came along with possibly pretending to be a half-blood, though that feeling of shame was always paired with an unwavering feeling of guilt to go along with it. "I don't believe you," Draco said snootily. Regulus wondered if he needed to be worried about Draco. Right now, he was more than focused on Harry. But if he chose to look too closely into Regulus's backstory, he might be able to figure out the lie, especially with the help of Narcissa. "I don't care," Regulus replied, though he cared very much. Draco figuring out his secret could be very bad for him. "You better be quiet, otherwise all that noise you're making might attract a werewolf." Regulus saw Draco looking away nervously, even though it wasn't a full moon, and there were many more dangerous things in the forest beyond werewolves. "What is that?" Draco said a few minutes later. Regulus followed where he was pointing, and saw the unicorn's blood pooling on the forest floor, the silvery glint shining like liquefied metal. Draco and Regulus watched in horror as a cloaked figure walked out of the shadows and approached the dead unicorn the blood was dripping from. Its knees bent the wrong way, giving it an uncanny effect that made Regulus feel vaguely ill. When the figure reached the unicorn and lowered its head to drink its blood, Draco let out a loud scream and ran with Fang following close behind. Regulus whipped his wand out and watched as the figure turned to look at him. It staggered to its feet and prowled towards him. Regulus had no idea what or who would be out in the forest drinking unicorn's blood, but he knew that there was only one reason that someone might indulge in the cursed liquid: immortality. Even with the grave cost, there were still those desperate enough to drink the substance if it meant staying alive. The figure was wraith-like, and Regulus could only think of one person who might appear as such. "He's out here in the forest, drinking unicorn's blood." His thoughts were spinning rapidly in his head. He's in the same forest as Harry. He pointed his wand at the approaching figure and tried to summon every modicum of hatred he felt for the Dark Lord. "You have to mean it," he heard Bellatrix's voice echo in his ear. She'd tried to teach him how to cast the killing curse when he was 13, far too young to be safely using dark magic, and again when he was first marked as a Death Eater, but he never could make the spell work. He remembered trying to cast it at a Muggle woman during a raid and watching in surprise as it seemed to hit her and dissolve. He vowed not to make the same mistake again now. A killing curse wouldn't truly kill the Dark Lord, not with the locket tucked away in Grimmauld Place still intact, but it would make Harry that much safer, possibly at least destroying the wraith-like body in front of him. "Avada," he began, but he was cut off by the loud sound of hooves behind him. The cloaked figure shuffled back before taking off into the forest just as a centaur galloped into the clearing. "Are you all right?" the centaur asked in a silky, deep voice. "Yes," Regulus said, half relieved and half disappointed. The hatred he felt was still stuck inside him, now with nowhere to go. "You'd better get back to Hagrid. The forest is not safe at this time. Can you ride? It will be quicker this way," the centaur said, as he lowered himself to allow Regulus to climb on. Regulus did not want to ride on the back of a centaur, but he knew it would be rude to refuse. What would his mother think? The unwelcome thought cropped up, and Regulus battered it away quickly. "My name is Firenze." "Regulus," he offered in response. "Yes, you are," Firenze responded mysteriously. Firenze was interrupted by Ronan and Bane, and Regulus tuned out their inane conversation. Instead, he thought about the Dark Lord roaming freely out in the forest. How easily Harry could have been the one to come into contact with him tonight. After arguing with them, Firenze eventually left Ronan and Bane, and he and Regulus travelled in silence until they found the others. "Regulus! Reg, are you all right?" Harry was running towards them down the path, Hagrid trailing along behind him. "I'm fine," Regulus said, climbing off Firenze's back. Harry was very distraught once Regulus walked over to him. He grabbed Regulus's arms tightly and seemed to check him over for injuries. "I'm all right," Regulus said helplessly, chuckling at Harry's worry. Ron and Hermione were asleep in the common room when they got back, and Regulus gave them an abridged version of what happened in the forest. Draco had told Harry and the others about the cloaked figure, but he clearly didn't know who it was, so Regulus left that part out as well. There was no reason to worry the children with the prospect of the Dark Lord wandering around the Forbidden Forest right outside of Hogwarts. Ron and Hermione seemed very interested in who it was under the cloak, but Harry was mostly distracted by his own self-condemnation. "You didn't want to help in the first place, and I talked you into it," Harry ranted. "You could have died. I almost got you killed." "You didn't almost get me killed," Regulus replied, rolling his eyes at the young boy's dramatics. "I agreed to help you willingly, and it was also partially my fault that we left the cloak in the astronomy tower." Harry did not look mollified by this, but he didn't argue back. "I can't believe Draco just ran away and left you," Ron said. "No," Regulus disagreed. "Draco did the right thing. What was he going to do? Fight off someone that killed a unicorn?" Ron looked surprised by what Regulus said, and Hermione nodded in agreement. Harry merely looked unsure. "If any of you come across something like that, you need to run away too." Regulus could tell immediately that Harry didn't agree with him. His face was doing something strange as he listened, like he was more determined than ever that he should stay and fight this hypothetical enemy. Regulus did not feel good about what that look might mean for the future. And that's chapter 4. My throat is burning. I finished my drink. I coughed so much that I'm going to cut it all out. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'm sorry if my accent has changed because I'm not going to lie, it's become a lot more common recently. I don't know why. I think it's because actually, some of my friends, like some of my newer friends, are more common, so maybe it's more because like I've been hanging out with people and I'm just kind of like mirroring their accents. But yeah, I also can't remember the voices I did for the others in the first 3 chapters, so I'm really hoping that I've tried to match it to how I picture that they would speak, if that makes sense. So hopefully it's the same. Ron obviously has quite like a broad London accent in the movies, to me anyway. Harry's kind of, I don't know, it's like a mix of posh and London. Does that make sense? Like, it's a mix of like Harry's and of Hermione's and Ron's. And Hermione is quite posh, And I always try to make her voice just a little bit higher so it differentiates from Regulus's, because Regulus's is also obviously really posh. So it's kind of like they sound the same. And then I don't even bother with Draco. To me, he just sounds the same as Regulus. So they have like the same accent. Also with the Hagrid voice. I always like cringe myself out a little bit, so I'm hoping it's alright. I'm just kind of trying to speak the way he does in the movies. I don't know how I am with accents, so just let me know. I hope this was alright. I'm gonna try do another few chapters within the next couple days, like film them, and then I'll put these out spaced apart. Obviously, I won't like do it all at once because I don't know when I'll have time to film. But yeah, um, yeah, I hope this was alright again. We'll see how long it takes for me to edit this. It's the 28th of July when I'm filming this, so we'll see what day it is when I actually put it up. I'm also thinking about possibly putting it on Spotify instead of YouTube. Maybe I'll do both, just because I know that people normally look for podfics on Spotify instead of YouTube. And I feel like then it could reach a more broad audience. And I know a lot of people like listening to podfics nowadays. Like I do. I've been listening to so many recently. It helps me like when I'm getting ready for work and stuff. But yeah, I'll see you next chapter. Yeah, don't forget to let me know your thoughts. Bye.